Victor was driving along the snowy highway, looking anxiously into the distance. The area was dangerous, not very busy, especially in this weather, but accidents happen here a lot. Cars skid, and it was already dark. Victor had hoped to arrive in Antonovka before dark, but it didn't work out because he had finished work, had urgent business to attend to, and would not be in the office for several days. Thus, he dropped him off at home, grabbed his work laptop, and had time to work on a significant project in Antonovka. Generally speaking, he left almost at dusk, and the neighborhood was blanketed by an early January night as the wind increased and a blizzard started. Nevertheless, Victor will return home soon, and his mother will be delighted and surprised. The man knew that he should be by his mother's side now, that he should check on her and convince her to visit the hospital if needed. Today at lunchtime, Victor received a call from his mother's neighbor, Aunt Zina, who had known him since childhood, and for her, he was still Vitenka. A worried neighbor's voice says, "I don't want to scare you, but your mother has been feeling bad lately. She won't admit it, but I can tell she's tired. A couple of times she almost fainted. She takes pills, but she flatly refuses to go to the doctor in the city. How are my students? We have an exam coming up," and Victor discovered that yes, his mother truly lived for her work since he became independent and moved to the city. Before that, Inna Vasilyevna lived equally for her job and her son growing older with memories of. When Victor was younger, he was unable to comprehend where his mother got her strength and energy from or how she managed to get through all of this. Inna Vasilyevna raised her son alone after her husband passed away from a stroke when the boy was just 3 years old. Victor only knew his father through his mother's stories, and he didn't remember him. He later discovered that he was a very good man, and Victor regretted that he never had the opportunity to get to know him. It was a tough time, and people did their best to survive. Inna Vasilyevna was a primary school teacher at a nearby village school, and her salary. Inna Vasilyevna was always very attentive to her son, noticing early on his extraordinary ability to draw and design. The boy built such complex, thoughtful, and interesting houses from cubes even at the age of 3 or 4. The job itself is small, responsible, and requires maximum involvement, but the woman also took on extra work, washing floors at her own school and at a nearby store. In general, Inna Vasilyevna enrolled Victor in the young artist's studio. It was difficult for an architect because there was a lot of competition and the classes themselves were expensive. In addition to her main job and part-time work, the woman also became a tutor. The most difficult part was traveling to classes in the city during the day, which Victor did by train, and in the evenings you had to take a taxi, which was very costly. Inna Vasilyevna grinned when her son felt sorry for her because she had to work so hard for you, because you will see that it wasn't in vain. It was the time of studentship, and even though it was difficult and required studying and earning extra money, these years will always be remembered as the most fascinating thing the boy did. He realized that his mother was right in the studio, and the 3 hours twice a week of classes went by so quickly that he became the best in the group and won the Olympiad in the 10th grade, which gave him the opportunity to enroll in a prestigious university in the city without exams. While it was inconvenient for Victor to receive help from his mother, he knew that it was already difficult for her, and without this he probably would not have survived after graduating from university. Victor was offered a job in a large construction company. Of course, the young man accepted without hesitation, as it was a very profitable offer. In other words, the mother once again helped with whatever she could physically earn extra money. Her health was beginning to fail, but she still managed to buy her son something he needed or stock his freezer in the rented apartment with meat. And now, years later, Victor is the head of the architectural department at this very company. He is a well-respected individual, a skilled and knowledgeable specialist, and he has a beautiful car, a solid bank account, and an apartment in the city center. "But I knew that it would be like this," Inna Vasilyevna said, shaking her head. Of course, she was happy that everything had worked out so well for her son. The woman still lived in Antonovka and taught at the school, but she only taught one class and took fewer hours. She enjoyed her job, but Victor realized that his mother was already struggling due to age and health issues. Wishing for the best, he repeatedly suggested that she move to a city nearer to him. Victor could have purchased his mother an apartment nearby and made her life much easier and more pleasant. Victor understood how difficult it was for his mother to raise him and wanted to thank her in some way. In addition, he would have been more at ease if his mother had been close by. He was greatly concerned about her, but no. Inna Vasilievna shook her head, saying, "I have neighbors and friends here besides. There aren't enough teachers in our village, so if I leave, who'll teach my class? Vitenka, I can't leave the kids," and Victor realized that it was pointless to argue with my mother because she is so committed to her job and loves their old house and Antonovka in general that she won't go anywhere. Everything would be fine, except that my mother's health isn't what it used to be. Aunt Zina called today, and it's not for nothing. It indicates that she is seriously ill. I will still need to convince her to retire and move to the city near her son, and the doctors don't do that. Inna Vasilievna was constantly concerned that her only child would not be able to establish a personal life because she was not accustomed to receiving anything but giving when her son tried to take care of her. At first, her studies took up all of her time, and then work was added. Where could a young, busy architect find a break in his busy daily life for something romantic? Family is what matters most in everyone's life, so sometimes Inna Vasilievna sighed. She also frequently shared news from her son's friends' lives. Almost all of the village boys left Antonovka during their childhood to pursue their studies and careers. Eventually, these men all had families and had children, so the former Antonovka boys took their kids to their parents for a vacation and delighted them with grandchildren. Inna Vasilievna happily played with other people's kids. She usually loved babies and knew how to approach them, but she also dreamed of having her own grandchildren, but that doesn't happen that way. Naturally, Victor dated girls. He had a few short-lived romances, all of which ended in disappointment. Everything happened in roughly the same way. If Victor didn't object, the next passion took the initiative. In those cases, the girl caught his attention with something, and closer relationships started. At first, there was the required candy bouquet period, gifts, dates, and joint trips, but after a while, Victor started to feel pressured and realized that in the eyes of the next. They attempted to manipulate Victor, who was a fairly wealthy man, which may have contributed to the perception that he was a resource rather than a person. The man was willing to help his lady pay for her parents' medical care, pay off her debts and other expenses, but he was never greedy and was always willing to help his loved ones. Eventually, Victor realized that he was being taken advantage of once more and that he wanted genuine feelings for Victor. Svetlana's warmth of support proved to be so appropriate. Yes, she can be too direct and harsh at times, and her relationship with Victor's mother did not work out, but she was always there to support Victor when he unexpectedly took to heart another romantic disappointment for a while and started singing about his abandoned work. Svetlana then agreed with Victor's management regarding his vacation because she was there to keep Victor entertained and distracted before that did not see her as. Svetlana, the secretary of the head of the sales department, was never considered as a potential life partner because she didn't fit Victor's definition of the ideal girl he liked. Victor liked tall, slender, semi-airy creatures with large eyes, but Svetlana was stocky, slim, and strong. Her eyes were small and very attentive, and her gaze was persistent, piercing Victor. Of course, over the years of work, Bok got to know her. You could even say that they became friends. That night, Victor went into the bar with the intention of getting drunk and forgetting Veronica, a girl who looked like a model from a magazine cover. She was so beautiful, so greedy, and so cunning that Victor thought everything was serious between them. They laughed at the same jokes, and this brings people together no matter what you say. Victor and Svetlana talked about everything in the smoking room, and their conversations were lighthearted, exciting, and very pleasant and friendly. As an actress, she portrayed love and even knew how to make herself appear appropriate, tender, and loving. However, Victor unintentionally overheard her talking to a guy, and the girl went ahead and took out a large loan in Victor's name, claiming that she needed the money for the treatment of her younger sister, who lived with her parents in a small regional town. However, this was a ruse, part of Veronica's ugliness, and it turned out that she had a loved one. Did this guy love her? It's unlikely. as he used her beauty to defraud wealthy people. Then, and Victor nearly fell for this trap, but he jumped off in time because he unintentionally overheard Veronica talking to her boyfriend Shenik about everything in great detail. Victor felt wrong, loud, scandalous, and that breakups are difficult no matter what you say. Veronica tried to convince him that he was wrong, but when it became clear that her efforts were in vain, insults came into play, which led to a feeling of his own worthlessness. Why is everyone with him just because of the money? Perhaps he is not. Deserves nothing more. Perhaps he is a mediocre person who isn't very interesting in himself. Victor decided to get drunk in the bar, which wasn't typical of him in general, but he felt too much pain in his chest. Not because he had lost Veronica, or rather, it wasn't just because of this. It hurts to feel like you found true love and then to be so bitterly let down, feeling like you're just another inferior person who can be loved. Victor ran into Svetlana, who was there with a couple of friends. They greeted each other, chatted briefly, and Svetlana backed Victor as usual. So what? Everyone saw right away that your Veronica was a real piranha predator, and you just didn't notice anything.
I guess I'm a fool.
Victor sighed, a little inebriated. You're not a fool, though. You're just good yourself, and you think others are the same. After all, people judge themselves, and you always find the right words. And then she showed up in the bar. At first, he didn't even recognize her. She approached him and introduced herself, feeling a little embarrassed. It was then that he realized that this was the blue-eyed nymph with long blonde hair from Antonovka, the neighbor girl who once followed him on his heels and never took her eyes off him. Everyone knew that Alyonka had fallen in love with Victor. Some even laughed at this. Victor thought that he was already 16 years old at the time, and she was around 13 at the time. Almost an adult man already, Alyonka is a child with trusting eyes and two pigtails sticking out in different directions, but he handled the girl neighbor's feelings carefully. He prevented her from getting close, but he smiled and said hello, and occasionally he even helped carry buckets from the well to the yard. Victor treated everyone the same way, and his mother, Inna Vasilyevna, also always welcomed the little neighbor. She would feed her, chat with her, and assist her with her homework, but her parents had no time for the girl because Alyonka's father was busy at work, and his mother, oddly, but thus, Alenka was indifferent to her daughter at all times, and even attempted to assist Inna Vasilyevna with the garden as a token of appreciation for the love and care she had given him overall. Like many Antonov boys and girls, Alyonka was one of us, but all of this was forgotten when Victor became preoccupied with his studies and career, and his personal life started off unsuccessfully. However, even now, years later, when they had not seen each other for a long time, Victor unconsciously admired Alyonka. They spent the rest of the evening together talking a lot, and Alyonka told Victor about her life. If he listened, he probably didn't remember it because the drinks he drank did their job and his brain seemed a little foggy. Victor knew that Alyonka's parents had divorced a long time ago, her father dying almost instantly of a heart attack, and her mother leaving for somewhere shortly after. This new Alyonka blossomed, and her appearance remained the same gentle, meek, and touching. Victor did not remember why his new love, Alenka, was left alone while she studied at the city college. It appeared that she was a lawyer, but she did not work in the field. Either she sold something or washed floors somewhere. However, in the morning, it became evident that the girl had not settled down well in life, and that evening, he and Alenka left the bar together. Victor recalled that Svetlana had attempted to stop this in some way, and even though he had responded rudely, it was nothing. Svetka is forgiving, and she usually forgives him and everything. People close to him had long speculated about everything. Victor was intoxicated that night and only remembered a few details and feelings. Alyonka was so genuine, warm, and dear that he felt intense emotions and nearly drowned in them. She told him about love. It turned out that her childhood crush had not gone away. Alyonka had been thinking about Victor for years, remembered him, and kept up with his life on social media and online news. They fell asleep together in an embrace. Victor enjoyed the way Alenka looked at him and spoke to him. Her gaze attracted him and radiated warmth around her as if some special aura was spreading. Victor felt completely happy and calm, as if there had not been recent betrayal on the part of yet another lady of the heart, as if everything in his life was right and good. Victor would not have been able to formulate those feelings correctly even in a sober state, and he would not have given it any thought. The next day, Victor woke up late around lunchtime, his head hurting a little from yesterday's libations, but he did it in vain. Of course, if Alenka had met him earlier, he certainly wouldn't have started drinking so much. Just enjoyed her presence, and the feeling of sudden happiness. It seemed life was changing drastically, turning 180 degrees, and ahead only good bright. Victor smiled at the memory of Alenka. "Where is she?" Victor asked, remembering the blonde fairy girl he had known all his life. "Perhaps it was only yesterday that I noticed Elena was not in the apartment." Victor did not understand anything, and he obviously could not have imagined yesterday's meeting. Alyonka's comb is lying on the mirror, indicating that everything that happened the day before was real and not a fantasy. Victor realized that they had not exchanged phone numbers and that he did not know her address. Alyonka simply mentioned that she rents an apartment on the outskirts and works in a store, or something else Victor did not fully recall. What a fool. All that was left was to hope that Alyonka would come back soon, of course, because how else could that have happened? However, by the evening, the girl had not arrived, and Victor had changed his mind. Perhaps Alyonka had been married for a long time, and she had unintentionally seen her first love in a bar, but her feelings had flared up, and now she was blaming herself for the error. Or worse, yesterday Victor had offended her in some way while intoxicated. The thought made her hot, and what if something horrible had happened to her? Even though the investigation involved hiring private detectives, whose services were not inexpensive, Victor was not overly concerned because the professionals handled their case swiftly enough. They located a store where Alyonka worked as a salesperson, and after her shift, she worked part-time as a cleaner. The store director did not conceal any information about the employee, but she was a little odd. He shared it with Victor, and she hurried in, looking pale and scared, and pleaded for a settlement without working off the notice. Somewhere, the detectives discovered the address of the rented apartment. Even though she had paid for it in advance for 2 months, Alenka's apartment landlord was unable to provide any explanation for her abrupt move out. Surprisingly, the detectives discovered that Alenka had taken a ticket to Moscow and that her tracks had vanished. Victor was baffled as to why it had come to this point. Could it have been that she had run away from him? Perhaps she had some serious issues in her life. People don't simply flee the city. If she had told him, he would have undoubtedly assisted her. Naturally, Victor blamed himself, got drunk like a fool, and didn't really ask her about anything. She didn't even think that he was a trustworthy person in general. It's surprising that black melancholy struck Victor again, but he missed the girl he had essentially only spent one night with. Alyonka gave him a fleeting sense of genuine love and the need for happiness before she vanished, leaving a wound in his heart. Perhaps Victor had never been so hurt that he initially tried to conceal his feelings from others around him. Everyone saw the same Svetlana. She would bring coffee and then tell him something funny. She also took him to concerts a few times and always made guesses about the performers, as if she could read Victor's mind. With her, it was at least a little easier for him, because Svetlana knew how to find the right words and diffuse the situation. Somehow, it all went unnoticed, and Victor and Svetlana's relationship evolved from friendship to romance. It was as though Victor had an epiphany. Who is he looking for? Why does he need someone else if there is such a trustworthy and faithful person nearby, and strong and bright feelings for? He had as many bizarre romances as you like, but Svetlana wasn't there. What did it all end up leading to? Let me ask you, did you not notice anything? Svetka is trustworthy and, as it turned out, has been in love with him for a long time. She herself acknowledged that it happened while he was taking her home after another performance. What are you talking about me and about you? I admit that some ideas crossed Victor's mind, but he apparently pushed them away. Svetlana stared at him directly, her eyes shining in the semi-darkness of the car's interior. Svetlana never expressed any emotions other than those of friendship, so I suppose I'll tell you this. Everyone else has already guessed it, with the exception of you, so perhaps it's not worth it. Victor knew what was happening. Of course, and he was terrified of losing these simple, friendly relationships with Svetlana. He needed her as a friend, and he grew accustomed to her. "I love you," Svetlana said, looking directly into Viktor's eyes, and he realized right away that it was true. "Svetlana is not lying or acting, and you are the most valuable thing to me. I'm happy. I just don't know." Svetlana looked at Viktor anxiously and said, "To see you and to be near you is a dream in general. I take care of you as best I can, and I like it. I like making you happy, but generally that's all." Viktor thought, well, what else could he do after such words? Before they started dating, Viktor was unsure, but he quickly realized that it was the right decision with Svetlana. It's easy and simple, calm, convenient, which is probably the most appropriate word, convenient, even though Viktor wasn't lusting for her. Viktor decided that he needed someone like Svetlana after experiencing a series of disappointments and failures in his personal life. One day, he proposed to her, and her eyes lit up with joy. Viktor was happy to feel like the source of such joy, and they were married and moved into Viktor's apartment. Svetlana quit her job to focus solely on her family, something Viktor did not insist on but did not object to because he made enough money to not need anything, even without a salary. Under her full supervision, Svetlana transformed a bachelor apartment into a warm and inviting home. A quick and costly renovation resulted in the apartment taking on a completely different appearance, to the point where it is still possible to send a photo to a fashion interiors magazine. When Viktor returned home, he was always met with a delicious dinner and a happy, beautiful Svetlana. Everything was perfect except for one thing. Svetlana and her son Vasilyevna did not speak the same language. Would be envious of Viktor to his parents because she wanted to be the only significant person in her husband's life. As a result, they did not spend a lot of time with his son Vasilyevna, so on some family holidays and birthdays, Svetlana always acted aloof. Inna Vasilyevna attempted to speak warmly, but Svetlana took everything she said with bitterness. The woman did not engage in an open argument, but her tone and appearance made it clear that Viktor and his mother discussed this mother. "I don't understand, Svetlana. It seems." The elderly woman shook her head and said, "Kind, good. Why is it like this with you, judging by everything? She loves you very much. She perceives me as a rival for your attention and love. In one sense, it's good that she feels this way about you. I like it so as not to ruin the relationship with my wife. We should meet less frequently, and perhaps things will improve over time, but you are my mother, so I wish you happiness because your wife reacts that way, so it's best not to aggravate her again, believe me." Viktor followed this motherly advice. And now that his mother was ill, he didn't tell his wife the truth because he knew that Svetlana would have responded with manipulation attempts and simulations to keep her son by her skirt. What kind of manipulation could there have been if his mother hadn't even wanted to talk to him about her illness? If it weren't for Aunt Zina, Viktor wouldn't have learned anything except that he needed to go on a business trip. Svetlana wasn't upset like she used to be at the beginning of their relationship. She had grown accustomed to her husband frequently going somewhere and spending the evenings away. TV show with a glass of wine. Svetlana has been depressed lately because they are unable to conceive, and she is simply burning with desire to give her husband a son. She is going through some tests and receiving treatment, but the results are zero. Did Viktor really want a child? A few years ago, he couldn't have imagined that he would dream so much about fatherhood, and his mother had been dreaming about grandchildren for a long time, even before the marriage of her only son, and she hasn't really discussed children recently. Understanding that the patient is a topic for spouses, Viktor changed the radio station. The cabin was filled with the pleasant sounds of a well-known but long-forgotten melody when the car's headlights briefly caught a dark spot on the side of the road. The bright light flashed for only a few seconds before disappearing, but Viktor was already pressing the brake pedal. The car stopped at the side of the road, and the man turned on the hazard lights. The man buttoned up tighter outside the warm cabin, where there was still frost and wind. He pulled the hood over his head and leaped out into the January night. Viktor's face instantly went numb from the wind and frost as he was making his way back to the location when he noticed an odd spot with what appeared to be a pile of clothes or something. He didn't have time to take a close look, but some suspicion surfaced, and he couldn't let the man drive by because it turned out that it was a fateful decision. He was afraid to even consider what might have happened if he hadn't stopped. Victor's intuition didn't fail him at first. He didn't even believe his eyes when he saw them to Antonovka, another 40 kilometers to the city, most likely already. There are about 100 abandoned fields and plantings along the highway, with no hotels, gas stations, or human habitation within walking distance. Nevertheless, a young woman sitting on the side of the road was cold and wearing a down jacket, which was obviously useless in this kind of weather. The stranger looked up at Victor with hope, but she was already very cold. Her face was not even red, and her long, pale eyelashes had managed to frost over. What's even more amazing and frightening is that the girl wasn't alone. This part of the highway was not very busy, especially at such a late hour, especially in a snowstorm. The stranger nodded uncertainly, and she stood up with difficulty, swaying, and Victor grabbed it from her in time. She was holding a baby about 4 years old. The boy was fast asleep, which was not good to sleep in such cold, but his cheeks were crimson red, and this seemed like a good sign, at least to Victor at the time. He put his shoulder beneath the girl, who was sleeping, and they arrived at the car. The stove was heating up at full blast, and Victor felt the life-giving warmth instantly. The stranger was also visibly calmer, sitting in the back seat, looking anxiously and attentively into the child's face. Victor sat down next to her and looked at the baby, who opened his eyes and revealed that they were gray, the same rare shade as Victor's, and the boy generally looked a lot like Victor when he was younger. The longer Victor stared at the baby, the more he understood. The child had light brown, slightly wavy hair, an upturned nose, plump lips, and a mole on his cheek. His mother had a million of her own photos, and Inna Vasilievna loved to look at them. The child appeared to have come from those very childhood photos of him. There was just a striking resemblance. If Victor had a son, he would likely look exactly like this youngster. The boy also looked at Victor with interest still lying on. Evidently, he was sitting on his mother's lap, but it was evident that the child's strength was rapidly returning. He had not been severely harmed by the cold. "How are you?" The girl said, "Everything is more or less okay." And the boy said, "If it weren't for you, I don't know what would have happened to us." Victor said, "Maybe we should go to the hospital." I would of course like to find out how this couple ended up here at such a time. They obviously got into trouble. Maybe they even ran away from someone, but first we need to understand if they need medical help. "How are you?" the woman asked, lifting the child and starting to examine him. "That's Abel," Victor smiled. Judging by his laughter, everything is fine with him. "It was bad before because it was cold," the baby said, looking at Victor. "And now in your car I'm warm, and everything is fine again." Victor patted the child as if he looked like himself in childhood on his unruly curls. Apparently, she had accidentally tickled the boy because he suddenly laughed so infectiously that the adults couldn't help but smile back. "And where are you heading?" Victor asked. "We know there's a village nearby called Antonovka. Should we go there, Antonovka?" Victor was astounded. "Of course I know, and I'll go there myself, but the village is far away, at least 40 kilometers, and the man who gave us a ride told me that a couple of kilometers at most." It's frightening to consider what would have happened to this wonderful boy if Victor hadn't happened to be nearby. The girl also warmed up quickly, but her eyes weren't as happy and carefree as those of her baby. The girl shook her head and said, "Maybe he doesn't know the area very well, and who are you going to see there if it's not a secret I'm just from there? My mother lives there. I know almost everyone in Antonovka, right?" Victor looked at the stranger and realized that she was too trusting and naive for her age, and who knows what some random guy on the highway told her. She ended up here because someone claimed that Antonovka was supposedly very close, but Victor doesn't know her. Perhaps she is in a desperate situation, which is why she ended up in this predicament, and she also had a baby in her arms. "I need Gromova Inna Vasilievna." Victor even shuddered when he heard his mother's name. It was too much. At first, he saw a freezing girl on the highway holding a baby, and he realized that the child was exactly like him. This could still have been a coincidence, but it turned out that the girl carrying the boy was headed to his mother, and Victor swallowed. He asked, "Why are you going to her?" "You know her, and it's very good. It's just wonderful." I know that Inna Vasilyevna is already elderly and that my story is quite unusual, so I beg you to go to her with me. Yes, you are probably right, but tell me this story first. How did you end up on the highway and why are you going to Inna Vasilyevna? My name is Lika, and the baby's name is Timur Victor. The man introduced himself as Victor, and Lika said thoughtfully, Nuno. It's a strange coincidence that tonight, though, it is definitely during this brief. Little Tim sank into Lika's arms and fell asleep again, likely because he had lost all strength from the perilous journey.
It was good for him to rest.
Lika took the child more comfortably and started telling her story in a quiet, even brief voice. Lika was born and raised in the Moscow area, and after finishing school, she went to conquer the capital. She wanted to enroll in a theater university, or at least a theater school, but nothing worked out, but she didn't want to return home because she had nothing worthwhile to do there. The girl had drinking parents, a two-room apartment in a bad neighborhood that needed repairs for a long time, and no regular job. But here in Moscow, there seemed to be plenty of opportunities. She got a job dancing in one of the nightclubs, which she enjoyed and found to be a real pleasure. The regime was also appropriate because Lika had always been a night owl, and most importantly, she was able to dance beautifully thanks to her classes in the school dance club and had a slender, long. In general, Lika's career was going well. She was receiving a good salary, and she was lavished with tips. The girl realized that this was a temporary job, and she needed to study, find a serious and trustworthy job, and somehow settle down in life. But for the time being, she was living comfortably. Lika shared a three-room apartment with her friends, two other girls, and co-workers from the same club. Both of her neighbors were enrolled in university concurrently, one as an economist and the other as a translator. Compared to them, Lika felt somewhat of a loser, but she had no negative sentiments. One day at the club where she performed, Lika noticed a strange girl who was different from the other patrons. First, unlike many similar establishments, there was no dress code, but this girl's clothes were faded jeans and a stretched turtleneck. Secondly, she had a large backpack full of items, as if she were going on a hiking trip. However, the most striking feature of the girl's image was her eyes, or rather, a lost look. Lika realized right away that the girl was in trouble. They were about the same age, and I liked her somehow. Lika, who was looking for work and housing in Moscow less than a year ago, had the same lost eyes, and after working a few dances, she went down to the hall and approached the girl we met. She turned to face the winter scenery outside the window, and she told me about herself. Her story was even worse than mine. She grew up in a village, and her father didn't like her particularly, but she did. He showered his daughter with love and care, but the problem was that Alyonka had a heart attack when she turned 217. Her mother didn't grieve for a long time, selling the house and driving off in an unknown direction to find a new love, taking all the money from the sale. She never showed any concern for her daughter, leaving her essentially without a roof over her head. She was registered in her great-grandmother's house, a hut that had long been uninhabitable, and even a good renovation wouldn't have saved her. She had nowhere to go back to Antonovka. At the time, she was attending a law college which gave her a dorm and even a small stipend. However, she was left all alone and realized that she desperately needed a job. Since there were few other options for a poor girl without money or connections, Elena went to work as a saleswoman in a bookstore. The pay was not great, but you won't die of hunger. After receiving a diploma, the girl attempted to find a job at her field, but they either offered pennies or hired cronies. She continued to work in her shop and took half of the cleaner's job because, after all, Elena had to pay the hostel's rent and could not stay any longer, so she lived a quiet life for a few years. Nothing much changed in the girl's life. She didn't complain because it seemed like everything was going well for her right now. Then, one evening, she happened to walk into a bar and met the man she had been in love with since she was a young girl. At first, it seemed as though their feelings had long since subsided, but as soon as she saw him, she was covered again. There are no such people, so Alenka believed that because of her love, she idealized him by following his life, looking at pictures on social media, and reading news articles about him. He is intelligent, attractive, and kind, and as a boy he was the center of attention in their village. As an adult, He was the same prince and remained successful, accomplished, and having accomplished a lot with his work and intelligence. There are no such people, so Lika smiled. Repeating Zalakoi Victor for the first time since the start of the conversation made him feel uncomfortable. Of course, he guessed who they were talking about, but he still couldn't believe in such a coincidence. Overall, that night, Elena and the love of her life left the bar together and spent a wonderful evening and night in his apartment. Elena felt happy, even though he was intoxicated. His expression said a lot without using words that could not be played, and she didn't seem uninterested in him. It seemed that a happy future awaited them both. She refused to even dream when she went down to the store in the morning to make her beloved a nice and proper breakfast while he was still asleep. However, there were no eggs in the refrigerator, and as she entered the store, she was greeted by a woman she had seen before in the bar. They talked about something, and it appeared that they even got into a fight. The woman was obviously his friend, and she looked hostile toward Elena as if her eyes were burning with cold. She then threatened her and told her to leave him alone. That man told her to leave the city completely if she didn't want to suffer, so she tried to object to an answer, but then two powerful men, bald and sullen, got out of a car parked a little further away and approached Aliona. Naturally, she became afraid, and the woman smirked and threatened to order this thug to leave the city altogether if Aliona didn't leave. She said a lot more. That unpleasant woman frightened Aliona and gave her just 24 hours to finish all of her business and depart. For several months, Alenka lived in the cheapest hostels among the general workers who came to the capital to earn money. She was unable to find a stable job, so she took a 2-day part-time job handing out flyers on the street or at promotional events. The woman was obviously not kidding when she said that her eyes were extremely angry and even crazy, so she decided to buy a ticket to Moscow and leave after concluding that it would be easier for her to settle in a big city. After a few months, Elena finally had the opportunity to land a really good job and was prepared to be taken to a law firm in her field. However, during the medical examination, an interesting moment was revealed. It turned out that Elena was expecting a child. This news shocked the girl, who had no idea that her one night with a loved one would end this way. Of course, she was scared, but she was also happy, Lika told me with a smile. That this is happiness, a child from a loved one, regardless of anything else. In general, the law firm naturally refused to take the girl who would soon be on maternity leave, and Elena started working a number of part-time jobs. These jobs brought in little money, only enough for food, and the savings the girl brought from her hometown were also running low. It was not possible to discuss going back home and telling the child's father everything because the woman who scared Elena made it obvious what would happen if the girl at least tried to the man. When we met that evening, Alianka had completely run out of money and Lika sighed after being kicked out of the hostel and wandering the city with a heavy backpack on her shoulders. It was already cold in our club, so she came to us to warm up. That's where I noticed her. After hearing Elena's story, Lika was horrified, alone, pregnant, scared, and without money or support in general. I invited her to live with me in my room in a rented 3-room apartment. The girls weren't against Lika. She helped Elena get a job as a remote operator at a call center, even though she wasn't pregnant. Elena worked from home, cooked, danced in a club, and was getting ready to start theater school. We became close almost insidiously, which is why I think of Tim as my nephew. Lika recommended that plan to Elena, which she later regretted numerous times, but she wanted the best. Lika once overheard a conversation between regular customers in one of the call centers. Lika spoke with whoever she needed to and always managed to find a common language with people who told her about Elena and her circumstances. In the club area, they discussed a surrogacy clinic where women who bear children for wealthy people receive enormous compensation for their labor. This clinic also operated in secret without registering the necessary paperwork, meaning that the children born here were like relatives for their clients, which is why many came here for the desired sons and daughters. In order to ensure that her child would be born healthy and strong, Aliona had to go to a medical center under the strict supervision of doctors. Under the guise of a surrogate mother, she had to give her child to a person who would consider it his own, receiving a substantial amount of money in exchange, along with an apartment. This seemed like a gift from fate, but consider the child. You won't be able to care for it anyhow. You have to arrange your life work without money, and the guardianship authorities will simply take it away from you, leaving the child in a wealthy family, and you won't be left at a loss. Elena initially objected, but when it became apparent that she wouldn't be able to survive without work and support after giving birth, she decided to do it. I still regret suggesting it to her, and Lika nearly sobbed. In general, Elena went to the medical center, or rather, a sanatorium, where perfect conditions were created for surrogate mothers, food, rest, and classical music from morning to evening. We talked on the phone sometimes. Lika recalled her voice every day, became increasingly unsure, and doubted that she truly didn't want to part with the baby when he began to kick. Alyonka was already talking to him and she loved him, but this boy already had parents who were wealthy and powerful and obviously didn't want to part with him. Elena had no choice but to run away from the hospital one night, showing up at the clinic with a huge, already leaking belly and begging for help. She was crying and I was afraid, but I had to help her because I was the one who brought her into this. Lika sent Elena to her small homeland, an urban-type settlement. There was an abandoned area there, and her former classmate was watching over the facility. He had a small business there and allowed people to spend the night in the empty housing stock for pennies. For Lika, he made an exception for his first love, so Elena stayed there to live completely free of charge. Of course, there were no living conditions there, especially with a baby, but at least it was warm, so she stayed until the birth and lasted until, incidentally, she gave birth there. In general, Alyona spent a few years at the maternity hospital because she was afraid to go there. They were still searching for her and were following Lika when this girl saw and noticed. It was frightening, of course, but they had to get in touch with serious people who genuinely thought that Timur was their own child, so they could also be understood. My former classmate helped to renovate the old apartment so that they could live there and somehow dragged Alyona and the child through the winter. After these people arrived, they managed to follow Lika, and Alyona returned with the child. At that time, I had some savings in Moscow, and Alyonka was working informally. She and Tim rented a small apartment on the outskirts of the city, and Alyonka got a job as a cleaner without any paperwork.